Can you hear me without the mic? Welcome everyone in the room and everyone online. Thank you all for being here tonight or whatever time of day it is. I know for some people participating from Denmark and further afield, it's very, very late indeed. So thank you particularly for being with us tonight. It's my great pleasure to be with you here to introduce the event and to say a few short words, very short, about the Consortium for Sustainable Urbanization, where I have the privilege this year of working. For those who don't know the consortium, our website says that it is an organization that promotes a better understanding of the role of resilient design in the planning of our cities. We advocate for responsible and enlightened planning and design, connecting architects, engineers, planners, and those in the global diplomatic community to exchange ideas, focusing on best practices and replicable examples of sustainable urban design. Our Green Cities series of monthly talks, which started in March of 2021, has brought together participants from Lima to Ljubljana to learn from each other and to talk about how specific actions can reduce carbon emissions and help implement the Sustainable Development Goals. The next program will be on Wednesday, October 25th. I guess that's 2 weeks from now, with Clara Simet from Grand Huit in Paris. She's an activist and the architect of La Femme de Rail and the Petite Ceinture. She'll be talking about urban agriculture, circular economy, reuse of materials, and transitional housing, all in one remarkable project recently opened. So I hope you see you there for that in our next program. And you can find out more about both the organization and that program on the CSU website, which surprisingly enough is csu.global/. But today, I'm pleased to be here because the CSU enabled 3 students, Amara Mohammed Azam and Caitlin Reese, to attend the UIA23 World Congress. Their participation, which we'll hear about more from them tonight, opens new perspectives on what's next. It's also a pleasure for me to return to Avery Hall, where I spent 3 very intense years, not in this room, it wasn't built yet, but it was few decades ago. I've been back a few times since, but these days I'm working with students next door in MUD. What a great name for a building, on infrastructure decarbonization through the Engineering School's Center for Buildings, Infrastructure, Public Space. And thank you for my students here in the room tonight or online. What next is for my students, the here and now. For me, I could only conclude this introduction with the first line of a song called What's Next, who recorded in 2021, you probably all know it, by Drake, a Canadian rapper. First line is, I'm making a change today. So this program and what we are all working together and separately to try to achieve is to make a change today. With that, I hope everybody who has signed on late is now here, and the real introduction is from this meeting is being recorded. Okay, how do we advance the slide? I thought it was this one. The right one? To introduce Adam Linsky, who's not only the guru of GSAP for all things technical and academic, but the inspiration for being able to meet here in this place. And we owe Adam and our colleagues at GSAP a debt of gratitude. You'll thank the Dean, but I will mention, as you can see on the slide, all of our co-sponsors, starting, of course, with the UIA World Congress of Architects held in Copenhagen in July, Columbia's Climate School, its Center for Sustainable Urban Development, the Engineering School I mentioned, CBIPS, SEPA, the Urban and Social Policy, and also the Economic and Political Development Department, EPD, Hunter College, Urban Policy Planning, Pratt Institute School of Architecture, the City College of New York, Bernard and Ann Spitzer School of Architecture. And I see also in the room folks from NJIT, and it's great that we can bring together all these different schools in one building, in one place for this great program. Adam, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Rick. Great to have you here and welcome. We've got about 40 people online and about 40 people in the room. So we've got a nice crowd of 80 folks here, and really want to welcome you on behalf of Columbia University Graduate School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation. We're really pleased to be working alongside the Consortium for Sustainable Urbanization, and we're here for an exciting evening for us here, morning, afternoon, evening for other folks elsewhere. So again, Adam Lubinsky, I am a professor of practice here at Columbia University GSAP, and also a partner at a practice called WXY Studio. And I've been at Columbia for a couple of years now, and I'm based within the Masters of Real Estate Development, but here to bring a kind of interdisciplinary focus to the school, working with planners, real estate students, architects, urban designers to think about the built environment. How can we make the built environment more inclusive, more resilient, more sustainable, more equitable, more dynamic? What we're finding is that there aren't just particular things we need to learn. We actually need to reorient the way we relate to communities and to the built environment where we're working. And so that's a different kind of practice. And I think you'll get some of that today from the presentations you're going to hear. I'll speak very briefly about the folks I was connected with, which is the RISE project, RISE folks over there, Rockaway's initiative for sustainability and equity. Where there, the project has really forced my office where I work, WXY Studio, to think about how we relate to supporting a group working to make their community more resilient. That's a different set of skills. And that's the kind of thing that we want to think about at GSAP as we're teaching our classes and as we're working in our practice at WXY Studio. So once again, very excited to have you all here today, to have an interesting set of presentations and then some dialogue. So be prepared. We're going to want to get everybody talking a little bit. Let's all give a warm welcome to, is it Ann or Praneel? Great. Yes. So up next, Praneel. We're going to have a keynote. So Praneel was a critical person who helped us with the World Congress in Copenhagen this summer since 2021. I'll read you what you've got on the screen here because she's done so much and I don't want to miss anything. Praneel has been a research curator and coordinator of the World Congress of Architects 2023, the science track. With a background in critical urban studies, curatorial studies, and documentary filmmaker, she brings a multidisciplinary approach to her work. In addition to continuing work with UIA23, Praneel coordinates the upcoming Fabricate 2024 conference. It's amazing, you do a lot of conferences. It's a lot of work. At the Royal Danish Academy, and co-leads an educational project on urbanism and architecture for youth. Her research on low-income housing in Mexico investigates strategies and implications of public-private and self-organized approaches to housing. Her publications include The Welfare City and Transition, a compilation of text and images, 1923 to 2020. So welcome, Praneel. Praneel has come all the way from Copenhagen. Very glad to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thank you so much. Blushing from that, so hurrying away. So thank you, Adam, thank you, Anna, thank you, CSU and GSAP for organizing this event. And of course, thank you to Columbia University for hosting us. So this summer, more than 6,000 people from across the planet gathered in Denmark's capital city of Copenhagen to share knowledge and discuss sustainability in context of the built environment under the theme Sustainable Futures Leave No One Behind, making a significant collective step towards architecture's understanding of its unique agency in supporting the sustainable transformation of our societies. So The theme Sustainable Futures, of course, takes point of departure in the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Copenhagen won the bid to host the Congress about a year after the SDGs had been launched. The team, with the visionary leadership of Natalia Musin, as you see here, President of Congress, wanted to use the Congress as an opportunity to position and communicate architecture's role in supporting the needed sustainable transformation of our societies. Asking the question, how can architecture contribute to the UN 17 SDGs? And just to show that the Congress this year, 2023, is a halfway point towards the completion of the 2030 agenda. We're already halfway there in time anyway. Just to remind us of the background of the SDGs, the background for the question of what architecture can do to contribute to their fulfillment. We are living in a time of multiple crises: climate change, biodiversity loss, escalated social division and inequality, and so on and so on. This is our situation. We must act upon this. And architecture has a significant role in this as an exacerbator, but also as a potentially powerful contributor to solutions. So, what did the UIA 2023 set out to do? We have tried to identify answers to the question of how architecture can contribute to the SDGs by attempting to identify knowledge and knowledge fields necessary for architecture and the built environment to understand, shape, and fulfill its active role in the achievement, foster new research and knowledge exchange across the breadth of architectural research, provoke new perspectives and new actions, underline the interconnectedness of the SDGs, identify and present high quality research and practice examples, and ensure cross-generational involvement, and ensure perspectives from diverse geographical, social, economic, and cultural realities. So the first step was to analyze the SDGs from the vantage point of architecture. As you probably know, architecture is not mentioned in any of the 17 SDGs or their targets. So this approach was based largely on the work of Catherine Richardson. She's a leading figure in pushing the agenda of sustainability globally. She's connected with the University of Copenhagen. So it was a matter of framing the SDGs between human needs and planetary needs. Also taking into account the work of Johan Rockström on planetary boundaries and Kate Raworth's donut economy and their understanding of circularity. And then simultaneously, there was a process of a global mapping that was initiated because so much of the knowledge is actually already out there, but very fragmented. So it's also about creating a community about what we already know. And I'll just take you through here some examples from that publication that was made, just trying to identify different best practices related to the different SDGs. So out of this, the 17 SDGs were synthesized into 6 Congress themes, which really offered the first deep architectural dive into the SDGs. So we have the 6 themes: design for climate adaptation, design for rethinking resources, design for resilient communities, design for health, design for inclusivity, design for partnerships for change. The theme descriptions needed to be sharpened in their position within the built environment and formulated as research fields for architecture. For this, a scientific committee was assembled, headed by Mette Ramsgaard Thomsen and Martin Tamke from the Royal Danish Academy. So they identified and invited these leading researchers from across the globe, appointing 12 panel chairs, 2 per theme, to formulate both a stronger text for each theme, but also providing sub-questions or formulating sub-questions that would provide depth of aspects while demonstrating the breadth of the SDGs and their connectedness. So this is just to show you an example. This is from climate adaptation that was led by Billy Faircloth and Maj-Britt Pedersen's Sari. So this is an example of a thematical description, and here the sub-questions. Sorry, here. And as you can perhaps sense, just we won't have time to read it, but these sub-questions really do in and demonstrate the breadth as well as the depth of this, the theme. And then today I just want to direct attention to education. As a theme in the 6 panels, education has been present as an undercurrent throughout the work of the scientific committee, and 2 of the panels appointed special emphasis on education in the sub-questions. And here it is, sorry, Design for Resilient Communities, led by Anna Rubo, and Joanne Du, Dean of the John H. Daniels Faculty at University of Toronto, and Design for Health, led by Christian Benimana and Arif Hassan. Where they raise some very important perspectives in architectural education, which perhaps we can talk more about later today. So once formulations of the 6 themes were ready, an international call for papers was sent out. And the scientific committee was adamant to invite knowledge from a broad set of actors to really work cross-siloed and also expand the traditional scope of academic knowledge production. So submissions could be made in 4 formats. So in addition to the more conventional format of the research paper, the visual essay, narrative essay, and argumentative essay were also introduced as options. And this was really a way to move beyond the dominant Western tradition for valid knowledge production and engage other traditions, which is absolutely necessary to be able to change how we think about what our built environment can be. So the call was disseminated globally, and we received more than 750 submissions, which told us that people can identify their work within the 6 themes, which was amazing. We received submissions from 76 countries, which was also great. However, when you look at the statistics, the number of submitted papers differ quite greatly between the continents. The reasons to these, or say, underrepresentations, we have not mapped out exactly, but definitely funds, border protection policies, and language barriers are factors. And I mention this as we do believe that it is important for the agenda that we better understand what are the mechanisms that cause exclusion. And it is something for all of us to consider in our various positions within the built environment. And I also just want to point to the positive response we had to the 3 less conventional formats. That it was actually almost 1/3 that took on that submissions in those formats. And then leading up parallel to the call, we had a number of pre-events in 2021 and 22 that were hosted by the scientific committee and various partners. So that was symposia, keynote lectures, lived experience events, dialogue events, and so forth, which was really key to building and expanding the community of the agenda. Leading up to the Congress, we had content-driven articles about the themes and some promotional communication, obviously, to help build awareness. And this is just one example among many initiatives. There was an International Student Academy held at the Royal Danish Academy that contributed with an exhibition to the Congress. And then finally, the Congress itself. So 5 days of knowledge exchange, dialogue, and connecting. So we had the next generation track, science track, practice track with the 400 speakers, participants from 136 countries, 267 paper presentations, 150 events. It was a lot, but it was amazing to see all these people together. And here are just some of the different formats that were at the Congress. And then I want to just dive into that the Congress was very focused on engaging the younger generations. There were a range of initiatives leading up to the Congress as well as during the Congress that really tried to bring in the participation of the so-called next generation. And you can see as keynote speakers, we had H.Y. William Chan, who's Lord Mayoral Councillor at the City of Sydney, and Nyasha Harper-Michon, who has coined the term Arctivist, which I think is really a great term. And also, as you can see, actually 37% of the Congress participation were of people under the age of 35, which was really great. So anyway, but rather than just only hearing me talk, I have just made a condensed edit of the Congress video with statements from some of those who were there. So this is a 2.5-minute film.
We have so much to learn from each other. Places like Denmark, but also places in the global south and the rest of the world who have really taken up the charge of building and imagining climate justice in the built environment. I hope when I leave here, I can bring lots of good ideas back to my colleagues and to some of the folks I get to work with there.
This kind of event is really important because, one, the theme is sustainable futures, leaving no one behind. So it's really important to talk about these topics.
All of this one is incredibly inspiring. And I think it needs, especially after COVID, it needs these events to meet people in person and being inspired by one another in person.
You might actually find others who are working on the same issues or who are as passionate as you are on solving climate change or inequality or just how we can make that difference.
I hope the audience will be inspired to be positive, to keep pushing in their profession and not to give up, to learn that you could start very small and really keep growing to create something that makes a difference.
My hope is really what the UIA Congress is all about, is bringing the world together. We all share an interest in architecture and allowing these different viewpoints to kind of come together and to inspire.
Having events like this is totally great. It connects us to the other professionals, to meet each other, but to share experiences. Really, that is so important. A sort of transfer of knowledge, you know?
Meeting these people, meeting these experienced and professional people are so important.
But I think the discussions that I've already had have been really inspiring, the people that I've met, and I'm just excited for more of that.
It's been great to kind of meet new friends and discuss design together.
There's a lot of people doing a lot of good things, but we need to do more. That there's 1 billion people in the world living in slums. We are not on track to meet the climate change goals. We all need, including me, to go back and do more, work harder, establish bigger goals.
UIA23 is only the starting point for kind of the work with the SDGs in architecture and the science track. So we'll continue to work and to collaborate and to spread the knowledge.
All right, so it was Kathleen Dorgan and Martin Tamke that we heard here in the end. So on the last day of the Congress, the Copenhagen lessons were introduced by President of Congress, Natalia Musin. So I won't have time to read all of them, but I'll just let you know that these are intended as guiding principles. So use them, for example, to ask to what extent can a project comply with these principles? And when they cannot, ask why, and then ask how can we come closer to applying to these principles. So let's look at what did we achieve, and I think more correctly ask what did the Congress contribute with. Well, I think that we did actually manage to answer to to what we set out to do, really, which is really great. I just want to say that without community, the results would not aspire to much. So it's so important that you're here tonight, and it's so important that you help this agenda grow with a bigger audience also. This is really a collective step. The Congress was a collective exploration and sharing of questions and knowledge, perspectives and visions. And it was created by a core team of various sizes over the time of actually 7 years. But it was also created by the thousands of people that engaged with the agenda leading up to the Congress and during. And then I also just want to point out to the fact that architecture is a profession of collectivity, and we do not think about it perhaps so much in that way. This myth of the one genius still pervades, unfortunately. And I just think this is so important to think about. It is a collective effort. It's architects in plural, and it is in collaboration with a number of other professions and knowledge fields, which obviously you know. But I think it's nice to say that out loud in once in a while. So anyway, the Congress is over, but it lives on. It lives on in tools and guiding principles. So the realities and conditions in which architects work across the world are vastly different. But the 6 themes and the Copenhagen lessons can be used across these differences of local context. And then also the Congress lives on in the Springer proceedings that is almost complete. We have 4 volumes out now. The last 2 will come within the next few weeks, where all the fantastic papers that were submitted to the science track are published. And this also includes built work. And then continued communication. So here are just some examples of some of the latest articles that have been published by the scientific committee. And also there is in the pipeline a small publication on the 6 themes and the Copenhagen lessons that will help support communication. So what next where? Finally, the important question that we're gathered here today to discuss. Well, I think it's important to keep in mind that our planet gives home to deeply different life situations, power structures, and economies to act within. And as much as possible, we should do as Natalia Moussine, President of Congress, proposes, enable further decisive action in your own position and the ones that you can reach. And I would like to add that we need be connected and create communities of sharing knowledge, experience, and perspectives across societal divides and national borders. So we are in a situation of cascading humanitarian and planetary crisis, and the built environment does have a unique agency to levitate this. So bear with me with a slightly cliched, almost like t-shirt slogan kind of slide, but I do think that this is the essence of our job descriptions right now. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Pernille. So I'd like to invite up Anna Rubo to introduce the presentations that will come.
Well, thank you, Pernille, for a really excellent talk. I was at the conference, of course, but because so much was going on, one couldn't see it all. But I think she gave us a distillation of both its genesis, what happened, and where we might go from here. So that has, in fact, inspired this evening, in which we have been co-convening, Adam Lubinsky and I, on behalf of GSAP, and on behalf of CSU, and on behalf of CSUD, and with the support of so many academic partners. Now, what we're going to do now is shift gear. Pernille said this is a great big picture. And what we wanted to do, since we are really thinking about the next gen issue, and how can, well, not only the next gen, but all of us. And if you heard William Chan talking from Sydney just a moment ago, William Chan constantly says, we must have this as an intergenerational exercise. It must be intergenerational. We must benefit from all the knowledge and experience. So we're coming to the second part of the program. And as Pernille noted, I had the very good fortune to work with UIA Science Track as co-editor with the Dean John Du from Toronto, as co-editor of Design for Resilient Communities. And we spent almost 3 years on that. Now, CSU, of which I am a board member, had the foresight and imagination to send 3 New York students to the Congress. You will shortly hear from those students. CSU, as you've heard, sees part of its mission as bringing the United Nations to the design professions and the design professions to the United Nations. UIA23 focused on bringing the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals to the global design community. Now, they were introduced, I'm sure most of you know this, but they were introduced in 2016 and they were adopted by 193 countries. And the SDGs have become the best vehicle for achieving a sustainable future, covering as they do such a broad array of concerns. For the design professions who are deeply interested in sustainability and whose actions affect the future of the planet, the SDGs can move this vital interest in a new and more inclusive direction. The 17 goals have social, cultural, environmental, and political implications, and they invite education and practice to think bigger, beyond what they normally consider. In these very troubled times, war, unprecedented climate events, growing inequality, dis and misinformation, the rise of right-wing populism, UIA Congress aim to leave no one behind, and their recognition that the SDGs can help the design communities to do that is a singular and really important aspiration. But action is urgent, as Pernille is saying. Working together is urgent. Including everyone is urgent. Addressing inequality is urgent. There is no time to lose. In mounting this post-UIA23 event today, we hope to continue the debate begun in Copenhagen and to broaden it. Just as in Copenhagen, the next gen spoke loud and clear, demanding change in their education and the way the design professions operate. And I don't think we should underscore this. There's a lot of really quite angry young people out there wanting much more. So I hope this session can do what we wanted to do, which is open up ideas about what next. And how the SDGs can be accelerated. In New York, bring it home, for example, are there places that could contribute more to a sustainable future? In the elementary, middle, and high schools, for example, in higher education institutions, and community organizers, including, for example, the 500 city-owned community gardens, an enormous opportunity, I would have thought. So in order to stimulate this what next conversation, this part of the program will present 6 short talks, which are listed here on the screen, by next gen representatives, some of whom attended UIA. Now, more will be said about each later, but we begin with the 3 CSU scholarship recipients. We then move to RISE, a local organization that works with schools and communities in New York to improve the environment. Following that, there will be presentations of 2 student projects that were submitted to the Global Student Summit, a project of the UIA Congress. We finish with 2 presentations from Australia, and I think they're up early, where research and design come into play in addressing the all too common threat of floods and climate change. Now, we hope these voices that you're about to hear will inspire you and inspire ideas for action in our next part of the program. And GSAP and CSU have both felt that sharing the ideas in New York and further afield will be productive. In addition to our live audience here in GSAP, there are people who've registered from around the world, and we thank you for spending time with us, whether it's night, whether it's morning, and so on and so forth. So now, with more ado, I would like to go to the next slide, which is to introduce our CSU scholarship holders. And I would like them to come up to the podium because they're about to speak. We've said, I think Rick said a little bit about this program at the start, but this has been an initiative of CSU to say we must engage with younger people, and we really want to try and sort of get a lot of ideas sharing. So I think this is the beginning of a long and good idea in CSU. And I know there are ideas that next year we will try and send some students, probably from the New York region again, to the World Urban Forum in Cairo. So I'm now going to introduce these students who are going to take over the microphone. We start with Amara Hernandez, who's from Hunter College, Azam Qureshi from Columbia Climate School, and Caitlin Reese, who is also from the Climate School. I give the pointer to you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present to you all tonight on our experience and reflections from the 2023 World Congress of Architects in Copenhagen. And a huge thank you to CSU for selecting us as student scholars from the New York area to attend the conference. My name is Caitlin Reese, and I am a circular economy consultant at Eunomia Research and Consulting, as well as a sustainability student at Columbia University. And as I mentioned, I was selected as one of the 3 students by CSU to attend this year's World Congress in Copenhagen. And I'm joined here on stage with my fellow scholars, so I'll pass to them to introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mohammad Azim. I am a climate consultant at Schmidt Futures, and I'm also a student in the Sustainability Management program at the Climate School. I have a background in architecture and urban design. I used to work with Stantec Consulting with a lot of resiliency master planning.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here. My name is Amara. I'm a Brooklyn Borough Planner for NYC Department of Housing Preservation and Development. I have a background in architecture from City College, but I'm pursuing an urban planning master's degree at Hunter currently.
So to kick things off, we have a brief video to share. And so you'll see on the screen here some clippings from our experience in Copenhagen. We spent nearly a week in the city at the conference, and we were able to experience all that the city has to offer, from its unique architecture and beautiful nature to the sessions hosted directly by the conference itself, learning from world-renowned experts and connecting with peers, for example, other graduate students at the Royal Danish Academy. So again, a huge thank you to CSU for the opportunity to visit Copenhagen and attend the conference, and overall a really just truly unforgettable experience. As you have all already heard tonight, the UN SDGs were a big part of this year's Congress. So just to keep this brief, as a reminder, these are the 17 goals that, in the words of the UN, are designed to serve as a shared blueprint and language for peace and prosperity for people and our planet now and into the future. So this year, the UIA Congress combined these 17 SDGs into 6 core themes that we as scholars divided amongst ourselves to attempt to thoroughly cover all that the conference had to offer, its many science track sessions, next-gen panels, keynotes, exhibitions, and workshops relating to the different themes. So I covered rethinking resources and partnerships for change. Azam covered climate adaptation and inclusivity, and Amara covered resilient communities and health. So the most prominent SDGs that related to my 2 themes are shown here: industry, innovation, and infrastructure, and responsible consumption and production for rethinking resources, as well as peace, justice, and strong institutions and partnerships for goals for partnerships for change. So I'll now share some of my lessons learned from the Rethinking Resources sessions I attended. A phrase I commonly heard during the Rethinking Resources sessions is that the most sustainable building is one that's already built. Shown here is a picture of Resources Rose, which is an apartment building in Copenhagen that we were able to visit, and it's made from repurposed bricks. These bricks were deconstructed from an existing building, but not like they're typically deconstructed. They were done so in square meter blocks, which allowed for the reassembly process to save resources, time, money, and created a beautiful aesthetic that you can see here. Speaking of beautiful aesthetics, learning to find beauty in new ways was another lesson I learned from the Rethinking Resources panels. In one session, Madeline Kate McGowan shared her perspective on how our feelings about aesthetics are so much more complex than just seeing something as beautiful or ugly. For her, tapping into this complexity has been really key for her as she finds beauty in creating buildings and spaces that establish habitability for many different creatures. Now moving on to Partnerships for Change. C40 Cities is an organization that seeks to create partnerships and share knowledge amongst cities around the globe. And in one session hosted by C40, we heard from Carlos Moreno on the 15-minute city, which is currently being implemented in Paris. And the 15-minute city is a city in which everyone is able to meet most, if not all, of their needs within a short walk or bike ride from their home, improving sustainability and quality of life for all. In another session on Partnerships for Change, I learned about some of the great work that's happening back home in New York. From Zach Aders from the New York Economic Development Corporation, he shared about the city's partnerships with small to mid-sized and minority and women-owned businesses, boosting their involvement with city contracted construction projects, as well as a career development program in the green construction space with the City University of New York. I'll now pass to Azam to share about the themes that he covered.
Thank you, Caitlin. I covered the themes of climate adaptation and inclusivity, and you can see some of the sustainable development goals that were covered in theme. Primarily zero hunger, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, climate action, life below water and on land, and in inclusivity, it included no poverty, quality education, gender equality, and reduce inequalities. So let's dive into the design for climate adaptation, and I will discuss two of the most important things that were discussed in my opinion, nature-based solutions and cost of natural capital. So rising sea level is the biggest issue that all our cities face, and gray infrastructure is floated as the prime solution by many design and construction firms alike. It affects the well-being of the residents of the city and also affects the local environment. Discussions from the Sea Level Rise panel with Dr. Billy Fleming from University of Pennsylvania pointed out that solutions like seawalls cost starting at $44 million per mile, while nature-based solutions like beach nourishment start from $4 million per mile. Why haven't nature-based solutions been more widely adopted yet? Moving on to the next prominent theme. So the cost of natural capital. What can we do regarding our natural capital? Our biodiversity and our forests. It is ignored in mostly all large-scale built environment projects. The argument made by Dr. Parth Dasgupta, who is a professor at the University of Cambridge, is in his keynote was that exhaustive exploitation of the biosphere in provisioning goods undermines its regulating services, while traditional economic development often sacrifices invaluable natural capital for the accumulation of produced and human capital, posing threats to sustainable development. The natural capital cost should be added in the overall project budgets for better accountability. So how can we include the cost of natural capital in our project budgets? Moving on to design for inclusivity. So one of the prominent themes that kept coming up throughout the panels of the theme was community involvement in the projects. Community involvement is key for successful executions of all kinds of projects, but more so in the rural areas. As architects Francis Carrier from Burkina Faso and Yasmin Lari from Pakistan have showcased the power of consultations, mentorships, and training sessions, a cycle of mutual teaching, learning, and collective sense of ownership can be influenced throughout the project's life cycle. The second thing I want to talk about in the theme is inclusivity for all. How can we make our built environment more inclusive of the most vulnerable of our people? Architect Chris Downey, who is an architect with over 30 years of professional practice, who has been continuing without sight since 2008. He shared his experiences and the importance of intertwining acoustics and tactical experiences in the built environment. He explained the importance of incorporating multi-sensory feedback in design to create a project for all. Now I'll pass on to Amara to discuss her themes.
I've noted the SDGs that relate to my two themes, health and resilient communities. They differ from other sources, but after attending the conference, my perception of the themes grew to include more SDGs. I realized that in order to address health and resilient communities, we need to have a holistic approach. I'll begin by sharing lessons I learned from the resilient community sessions. A common thread throughout all the resilient community sessions and panels was the necessity for public participation to inform practice, and the importance of balancing utilizing professional expertise and listening to the needs and wants of communities we work with. The sessions emphasized how instead of imposing preconceived innovations and strategies, we must consider the social, political, economical, historical, and cultural appropriateness of solutions. During the C40 panel, Christian Benimana talked about unsustainable, modern, beautiful cities still being the benchmark for socioeconomic mobility and how they are broken standards, still widely emulated. This spoke to the necessity to establish a new standard that addresses the inherent inequities and lack of access in current design, planning, and sustainable models. And in the science track designed for communities, resilient communities wrap up, Joanne Du talked about how architecture should empower communities, but emphasized that in order to make tangible change, we must be cognizant of how inequity and injustice fuels the climate crisis and impacts cultural perceptions of the built environment. I'll now move on to health. We tend to think of health as the responsibility of medical professionals, but this notion was challenged throughout the experience of the conference. On one panel, Dr. Andrew Dannenberg noted that architects should consider themselves as health professionals because the built environment influences how people live, grow, and participate in society. To this point, a common theme throughout the conference was the need for interdisciplinary teams to better assess the impact of the built environment on health outcomes. It was noted during the Design for Health environment session that utilizing knowledge across various disciplines would help in establishing adaptable evidence-based architecture. A major theme spoken about the debate session for Design for Health was how humans inherently crave nature, but we've cut it out of our built environments. We include small increments of open green space as an afterthought, and this does not benefit our health outcomes or the planet. We must not forget the ecological relationships humans have with the built environment and how it corresponds to health outcomes for all Earth's inhabitants and the Earth itself. The session spoke to the need to be inclusive of all of the planet's inhabitants when thinking about health and remembering that the Earth is a living system we are a part of. We left the conference inspired to return home and take action. The UIA presented 10 principles to guide practitioners in utilizing the SDGs to create visible and rapid change. We attended the conference with these 10 principles in mind and used them as a frame of reference when synthesizing our thoughts. We took our experiences from the conference, school, work, and living everyday life to provide the basis for our next steps. For the first one, we need to take ownership of past and present professional misdeeds and embed the responsibility of impact on the built environment into our professional practices. We need to adapt and innovate by engaging with new materials and technologies that are sustainable. And we also need to implement universal design methodologies that create inclusive spaces that serve all people. We need to recognize the manner in which the environmental inequities manifest and always consider equity when establishing professional and developmental practices. I'll pass it on to Azem.
So for our fourth what's next, we need to establish interdisciplinary design teams to aid in creating an informed, holistic, and evidence-based built environment that can adapt to unique contexts. And finally, in order to actualize sustainability, we need to establish new metrics, benchmarks, and professional standards that enforce sustainability models and multi-angled perspectives to development. We need to engage stakeholders, both public and private, on the consequences of maintaining the status quo. And collectively, we need to lobby and advocate for changes in policies that uphold the new benchmarks and enable sustainable practices. On towards Caitlin to close.
Thank you. So to close, we'd like to share a quote from Christian Benimana from Mass Design Group, who we heard from at the Congress. Architecture is not a product, it is a process. It's not what we make in the end that becomes what we do. It's what we do to get there and the impact, the long-lasting impact that creation of the built environment is going to have. We chose this quote because it encapsulates the point of the conference and utilization of the 17 SDGs. It is not the output, but the process and impact that we should measure success by. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much for a really, oops, wrong way, wonderful presentation. And I think CSU should be very pleased with the outcomes of those scholarships. And I think this is a really wonderful thing, because we're going to get on to, there's another scholarship we're going to talk to a little bit later. But I mean, in this sort of way in which people get to access things, I think this is awarding of scholarships to do good work, to have experiences that you might not have had, is something really important. So we will talk about that, because there's one in Australia, the Paul Falleras Foundation, which is also doing very wonderful things. So now we have RISE and WXY. And could the RISE presenting team please come down? RISE, as you can see here, is the Rockaway Initiative for Sustainability and Equity, established in 2005. The founder and director is Jean Dupont, and it brings community and students together to improve the built and natural environment. And I met Jean in Copenhagen at dinner with these wonderful people in a church hall, which was a community dinner. And I was just so impressed with RISE because it sent about 14 students to Copenhagen to actually learn about sustainability and to attend our Congress. Adam here and some of his colleagues had written a paper, so it was accepted for our Design for Resilient Communities. And then he said, oh, I think the students should present. And I said, what a good idea. So here we are, we're getting to do a repeat performance. And it's actually a greatest pleasure to welcome you all back. And Adam is going to, I think, kick off.
Yes. So I just want to set a little bit of a context for the work that they all will describe and how we got there. So RISE is based in the Rockaway in Queens. So especially for those people who are not based in New York City, the Rockaways is essentially a barrier island that fronts the Atlantic Ocean, protects Queens. And 2012, Hurricane Sandy really had a tremendous impact there. And among other things, the hurricane wiped out a boardwalk, a 5.5 mile long boardwalk, which is really the spine of the Rockaways community. That boardwalk is where people gather, where people work, where people bike, where people socialize. So it really has this incredible role in the community. Our office, WXY, was involved with the process of reconstructing that boardwalk. And as part of that process, we raised the boardwalk up so it would be more resilient, and sand dunes were buffered up against both sides of that boardwalk. And that's really where RISE enters the frame, because of course, if you build up these protective sand dunes, they will blow away, they will erode with time. And we had gotten to know RISE during our process of planning the boardwalk, but they have really occupied a new role, which is to take on community stewardship and a community stewardship process. And so I will let them talk through that further, but it's been remarkable. And when I spoke at the beginning about what it means as architects and planners to reorient our role and positionality in these kinds of community-based projects, this has been a really wonderful example. Before turning it over, I do want to point out some other people who are in the room who've been very involved. Mika Chislett, who's part of the ecology team that's worked closely with RISE on planning how to address the sand dune challenge. E-Design Dynamics is an amazing group of ecologists and environmental engineers. My colleague, Nani Kels Apollo, who also was in Copenhagen with us. And when I talk about that new role, what it means to not just come in and plan, but actually to support a community, Nani is an amazing example of how to do that. Very grateful to work with Nani. Suri is here, wasn't yet involved with the project at this time, but now is coming on board. And then Urandi, I want to point you out, Urandi Pacheco, who Urandi is an original RISE Shore Corps member, and we have some of the current Shore Corps members here. And Urandi, when in high school, worked at Shore Corps as part of RISE, and has now gone on to planning school and is a planner in New York City at a firm called Jacobs. And so that initial work as a high school person, that trajectory has been quite remarkable. So with that introduction, I will turn it over to Marco.
So here, I'm Marco. That's Fantasia. That's Alana. And we're here on behalf of RISE. Hello from the Rockaways. We are RISE Rockaway. That stands for the Rockaway Initiative for Sustainability and Equity. And RISE is a nonprofit that is focused on student engagement as well as coastal rehabilitation. So where are we in the Rockaways? The Rockaways are on the southeast end of Queens, about 10 miles away from Manhattan and where we are now. And it is a peninsula that is home to around 150,000 people. And it is also surrounded by the Jamaica Bay to the north and the Atlantic Ocean to the south. Rockaway is also one of the most ethnically diverse coastal communities in the world. However, there are huge disparities on the east and west ends of the peninsula that divide the Rockaways both racially and socioeconomically.
In 2012, as most of us can remember, Superstorm Sandy hit New York, leaving many areas damaged and destroyed, especially Rockaway, where I personally got to witness the intense flooding, the home damages, and the destruction to the boardwalk. In 2014, New York City rebuilt the Rockaway Boardwalk, which, as Adam stated before, is a vital part of the Rockaway community. However, while the immediate response to Sandy focused on resilient infrastructure and design, community stewardship of the shoreline is the key to Rockaway's future resiliency. But with that plan comes different obstacles like funding and the collaboration of different agencies that own the different parts of Rockaway.
So now we're going to get into the project context and overview. So over the past few years, we have formulated a plan, a community-centered plan for the restoration of the dunes in Greater Rockaway. And this project proposes a new model for environmental stewardship that is led by youth and local civic organizations in cooperation with landowners and city agencies. This plan focuses on planting approximately a 4-mile stretch of shoreline, which will be incorporated with a dune planting, as well as planting other native Rockaway plant species, which will act as a natural barrier and will hopefully increase the biodiverse ecosystems for native plants and animals.
So for the plan, we have these main 4 pillars, which is green economy, education and awareness, youth employment, and environmental stewardship. On this map, you can see the different sites and themes across Rockaway. One being the Beach 60th planting, which touches on youth employment and education and awareness, and the Native Plant Nursery on 32nd Street, which touches on green economy and environmental stewardship. This video you're about to watch is a documentary of the Beach 60th planting this past spring. So enjoy.
Might need a little assistance. Well, we may miss the video. That's okay. You heard a great story
I
from
think
these folks.
the video is not linked to the PowerPoint because it was converted. So you can find the video file and create it.
All right, there's a great video. It may be on the website at some point. It's on the website, but we're not going to try and go to the website. We're just going to move things on. Anyway, thank you all.
Yes. So to sort of wrap things up, and I guess because you didn't all get to see the video, I can try to paint a little bit of a picture of what we're doing right now. We're actually in the midst of a really busy planting season. The documentary showed our planting from this past spring. We've actually moved into the next section of the restoration area, and we're planting over 8,000 native shrubs and herbaceous species with the help of our Shore Corps students, which is our high school internship program, and community members. And so it's been very exciting, and it's been a lot of work also. So if you're interested in learning more about the plan, this QR code on the left side is a link to the full shoreline enhancement plan that has a lot more information on the background of this whole process, how it all came about. The link on the right is the rendering, which shows sort of plops you in the restored dune at the Beach 42nd Native Plant Nursery. And that was done courtesy of WXY. It's really beautiful. So I'd encourage you to check it out. And I just wanted to say, as sort of a closing, you know, we developed this project without having the SDGs at the forefront of our process. And it's been really special for me working with RISE, and you know, also just seeing this plan come together, how many of these themes this plan really touches on. Everything, you know, from our previous presenters, every theme that came up, from like partnerships for change to inclusivity and health. I was like, oh, that is related to what we're working on there. So that's been really special, and it is helpful for moving forward, having these sort of like guiding themes to really direct our work and sort of ground what we're doing. So thank you all. Check out our website if you want to see the video. It's great. But yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I'm really sorry you didn't get to see the video. I've seen there's a 2-minute version and a 4-minute version, and I recommend both. They're just excellent. But if you go onto the website, you will find it very, very easily. And I just found what Alana just said extremely interesting. You know, I mean, this happens a lot, that people aren't working with the SDGs, But suddenly, sort of looking backwards or forwards or anything, you say, oh, yes, indeed, health, inclusivity, all these sort of things. And things often that I think in the design communities, we don't normally gravitate towards. So I think that is one of the reasons why they're certainly worth talking about. Now, our next part of a presentation is deals with the Global Student Summit. And I just wanted to take a little moment to tell you about this. Peniel mentioned it, but I think it needs a good, strong sort of support to it. It was geared around the themes. So there you have the 6 themes that the conference actually addressed. The director of this program is So-Young Kim from Hanyang University in Korea. And I hope So-Young is online, because I would like personally to say to So-Young, I think this was an amazing effort that she achieved. And I think also in help with the president, Natalie Mosin. But they did a call for projects last year, beginning of last year, I believe, and over 24 schools, I think, responded with over 200 projects. And just to give you an idea of the spread of those projects, they were in Africa, South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, Cameroon, in Asia and Oceania, Korea, Hong Kong, Australia, in the Americas, Canada, USA, Peru, and Brazil, in Europe, Ukraine, Norway, Denmark, UK, and Italy. Now, that's an extraordinary community building effort, it seems to me. Many of those projects were taken to the Congress and were displayed, and there was a whole day devoted to the feedback on those. There was so much work there that I personally feel that they deserve much more attention, because the amount of work and the amount of thinking that went into those projects is profound. But what we have done is to invite 2 students who participated in a couple of these projects to talk to us today, to talk about their Global Student Summit project, and to give you some insights into what they did. And the first one is from RISD, and Rachel Strumpf, who is now going to come and join me, from Rhode Island School of Design, is going to talk to you about Crossing the Pell project. And Rachel's project, all the projects were submitted under categories. This project was submitted under the Partnerships for Change category. So Rachel will now tell you about that one. Thank you, Rachel. Which button am I pressing?
Just give me a moment to get my notes together. Okay. Oh, we'll start here. Okay. I don't know if you can hear me. I'm also going to lean over. Okay. Good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me. My name is Rachel Strumpf, and I'm a graduate student at the Rhode Island School of Design, and I'm pursuing my Master's of Design in Interior Architecture on the Adaptive Reuse track. And thank you, Anna, for the invitation. I'm very excited to be here tonight, to speak about the UIA and reflect upon the experiences there. But to do that, I thought it would be important to share with you our project, which was Crossing the Pell, a virtual reality experience. And we presented under the category of Partnerships for Change, which you will see how evident that is, hopefully in the next 5 to 7 minutes. Crossing the Pell was a really unusual architectural project. It spanned 3 academic years, evolving into 3 phases, each more complex than the next, with contributions of multiple cohorts, building upon the work of first-year students, and it was co-taught by the same professors. Throughout all 3 phases, involvement with our community and achieving greater public understanding through the democratization of architectural representation was core to our design process. And again, this is just to show the scale that I'm one of many who have been involved in this project, of the students who couldn't be here with me tonight. In design school, everyone wants to make change a reality. For us, phase 1 began as a design studio project of architecture, specifically of an adaptive reuse of infrastructure, which eventually evolved into an investigation of architectural representation as experience. During the summer of 2020, a US senator called. He saw some of the adaptive reuse work of the students in our department, and asked if the RISD INTAR department would be interested in adapting bridge infrastructure for bike and pedestrian access, specifically of the Claiborne-Pell Bridge, which connects Jamestown to Newport in Rhode Island. The first-year cohort started with traditional means of representation, and they built a physical model from the original 1968 drawings of the bridge. Although it helped the students understand the structure and the form of the bridge, they realized it was impossible to move due to the size and the scale of the model, and impossible to bring to any community or even leave the building. So, using the available drawings that they had and footage of various kinds, the students built a 3D model of the bridge and its landings, which offered new possibilities, but still representation and accessible methods of representation was still a question. For context, the Pell Bridge stretches 2.2 miles long and is 393 feet above the water. It's the largest suspension bridge in all of New England, and it's akin to the length of Central Park from north to south. How does one go about representing this and bringing it to their communities? Phase 1 concluded with 4 team virtual reality schemes and a small-scale exhibition at RISD. At this point, we partnered with Bike Newport, a bike safety and advocacy group located in Newport, Rhode Island. Bike Newport is a member of a tightly knit community, and our collaboration with them was critical to our success. This partnership demonstrated in real time the importance of community engagement in designs of a civic nature. This community partnership that was fostered led us to phase 2, which was the development of the project into a public exhibition within a community. This public exhibition was held at the Old Colony House in historic Newport. It's the 4th oldest state house in the country, and the site is within the community in which the bridge is located, a symbol of past and future legislation, a perfect fit for a project inspired by a US Senator. What was even more amazing was the turnout. They had over 500 people from the community attend in the span of one weekend, which was again all due to Bike Newport's astounding reputation and relationships within the community. Our exhibition was focused on public engagement and understanding. Therefore, they came up with the idea of exhibiting it as experience. These are the 3 experiences that were developed: a biking experience in which a visitor can bike across the 2.2-mile bridge through an immersive virtual reality experience, a pano tour, which emphasized pedestrian access on the bridge, and an augmented reality table, which allowed visitors to conjure the bridge into their physical environment using an iPad. I really wanted to bring these all with me here today. They don't travel easily, but I do have components, maybe for after. Phase 3 for us was essentially the doing it of the project and getting it into the real world. The department had received excellent media coverage for the work, which resulted in many invitations to exhibit this project in many different venues. Of these invitations, we committed to installing the project at the US Senate, the National Bike Summit in Washington, DC, the International Ocean Race, which began in Spain with a stop in Newport, its only US stop, the Newport Public Library, and of course, the UIA Congress. Of course, these opportunities did not come out without their challenges. We had to refine human comfort in the immersive experience. We had to diligently consider the liability of autonomous design and the ease of user experience when we as the designers were not there accompanying our project. By now, it should be apparent that crossing the Pell was only made possible by the collaboration of our community partner, Bike Newport. And you should all be itching to experience it for yourselves. So while you may not be able to experience it yourselves today, I would like to conclude with this. The image on the screen here is the result of what happens when you give members of your community the tools to imagine their realities differently. Change happens locally, and you can't make people unsee an experience. You can't take that vision or imagination away from the 96-year-old who rode the virtual reality bike or the 5-year-old who has biked across the Pell. As designers and members of our communities, we have the ability to spark one's imagination and abilities to envision their realities differently. While as a department, we may be unsure what's next for this project, Crossing the Pell has inverted traditional architectural representation for the goal of community understanding and proved that experience is a form of representation. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Rachel. for a wonderful presentation. I just wanted to make one little comment about that. She didn't name the senator, but I think he should be named. It's Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, a Democratic senator from Rhode Island. But I think what that does is points out the importance of partnerships from the sort of that level right down to the student level, to the community, to the children level, and how, as we start to think about our what next, the importance of partnerships that we may not have imagined. Anyway, we have one more example for the Global Student Summit, and that is from Gabrielle Pinto, who's in the Federal University in Rio de Janeiro. She's going to give us a presentation on a project called Water as Urban Systems, and that was in the Rethinking Resources section. Now, Gabrielle, at this moment as we speak, is in Montevideo, not even in Rio. And so she has pre-recorded her presentation. So I am now going to press the button, and I hope that it will start. I may need some help, Shannon, may I? Another press?
First of all, we'd like to thank for the invitation. I am Gabriele Pinto, undergraduate student in the School of Architecture and Urbanism of the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. This project was developed by our team, Adriana, Juliana, Maria Liz, and myself. We enrolled a course called Global Studio, offered by the graduate program in architecture for both undergraduate and graduate students. Our professor submitted the Global Studio project to the UIA 2023 Student Summit call, and during the Congress, our project was exhibited as part of the special selection group. It is linked to the Rethinking Resources topic, which can be found by accessing the Global Student Summit website, and we can find the project on this page. Encantado, which in English means enchanted, is a neighborhood studied and is located in the Meyer district in the northern sector of Rio de Janeiro city, which is the southeast region of Brazil in South America. You can see the Encantado neighborhood, a small area with 15,000 inhabitants. The territory is crossed by very important transportation lines, like the train track and the Yellow Line Expressway. Also, there is a forest in the south and two rivers leading up through the land. It's a typical suburban neighborhood in Rio de Janeiro, mostly residential, very dense, and as you can see, there aren't many public green areas.
We're just going to restart this because the people online can't hear it. So Shannon is going to fix it for us.
We're hearing it probably through the microphone. Yeah.
Also, Gabriela, I do believe is online and in Montevideo, but she wasn't sure about the internet, so she wanted to do it this way. And while we have just a small break, if you haven't sort of registered for this, perhaps you could do it now, because what we will do is make the recording available to anybody who has registered. Okay. This one? Okay, we're starting.
First of all, we'd like to thank for the invitation. I am Gabriele Pinto, undergraduate student in the School of Architecture and Urbanism of the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. This project was developed by our team, Adriana, Juliana, Maria Liz, and myself. We enrolled a course called Global Studio, offered by the graduate program in architecture for both undergraduate and graduate students. Our professor submitted the Global Studio project to the UIA 2023 Student Summit call, and during the Congress, our project was exhibited as part of the special selection group. It is linked to the Rethinking Resources topic, which can be found by accessing the Global Student Summit website, and we can find the project on this page. Encantado, which in English means enchanted, is a neighborhood studied and is located in the Meyer district in the northern sector of Rio de Janeiro city, which is the southeast region of Brazil in South America. You can see the Encantado neighborhood, a small area with 15,000 inhabitants. The territory is crossed by very important transportation lines, like the train track and the Yellow Line Expressway. Also, there is a forest in the south and two rivers leading up through the land. It's a typical suburban neighborhood in Rio de Janeiro, mostly residential, very dense, and as we can see, there aren't many public green areas available. In this detail, we can better see how the rivers are confined within each block and how the borders are being occupied by the buildings that have taken over their banks. This proximity has led to problems such as the clandestine dumping of sewage and waste into the rivers, affecting water quality and causing pollution. In the same way, the high level of soil sealing and the straightening of the rivers worsen the situation, contributing to frequent flooding. On the other hand, the Faria and the Framos rivers concentrate a very significant part of the neighborhood's green areas. Since we are in the decade in which we are debating ecosystem restoration, it is essential to have water as a central topic, raising questions about the quality of ecosystems, especially in the urban environments where a large part of this resource is under threat. Faced with this scenario of stronger rivers, we ask ourselves, how can we enchant the rivers of Encantado, giving them back to the population as high-quality public and green spaces? Brazilian law specifies that there must be a protection highway border of 15 meters along the rivers, where there must be no construction. But as we see in the current situation, this rule is not respected. In this condition, the community is under risk of floodings, landslides, and health issues. In response, our proposal consists of the careful replacement of part of the buildings along 5 blocks to make a way for linear park. The waste from the demolition will be processed by a local plant and will be applied on the future constructions, what also represents a positive economical and sustainable impact for the community. We can see some of the data resulting from our proposition, such as the number of families to be replaced in the new 13 buildings we propose, the daily amount of sewage that would no longer be discharged into the rivers, and how much this park would represent in terms of increased green and public space for the neighborhood. These are the urban blocks where we have chosen to design. In red are the buildings that must be replaced. To reduce the negative impact, we decide to ideally replace single-family residential buildings to housing complex located in the project area. In purple, we can see the plots of lands that will receive the replaced families. Some of them are currently empty, and others result from the removals we have proposed. In brown, you can see the precious partnerships to be created with existing institutions, such as the Municipal Urban Cleaning Company, municipal schools, and the Olympic sport facilities. We apply the concept of ecosystem service, which consists of all the benefits that the human population obtain directly or indirectly from ecosystems. They are provision, regulation, cultural, and support service. For the 5 blocks, we have studied the surrounds in order to develop the program based on their specific ecosystem service. As an example, for blocks 2 and 4, where there are schools, we propose the environmental education program and the cultivation of agroforestry, which represents the service of support and provision. Finally, here are the design solutions we apply along the rivers. We basically expose the soil, removing the waterproofing layer. We modify the reliefs to create infiltration and containment basins, both to mitigate flooding and to capture water for reuse. Also, for this purpose, we design rain gardens next to the buildings to capture water that falls from the roofs. And to prevent the dispersal of garbage, we proposed a barrier between each block, where this waste could be collected and sent to recycling. We believe this model of transformation could not only bring tangible benefits, such as improve the water quality and reduce the flooding, but it would also promote a renewed connection between the community and the rivers of Encantado. These are the Sustainable Development Goals we have considered for this project, with a focus on the 11 sustainable cities and communities and its 7th target. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriela in Montevideo. Great pleasure to have you here. We are running a little behind time. It's just been pointed out to me. And one of the big things that we want to do is to get all your ideas online and here. But we did think we're going to finish at 8. So the question will be whether the room has any tolerance for after 8, but we'll see how we go. But with that in mind, I want to just now introduce a group out in Australia, looking at climate change and floods in Lismore, New South Wales. And these two people who we have invited to speak, one deals more with research and the other more with practice. And I'm going to ask Victoria King to start first. Victoria is the recipient of the Paul Falleras Foundation Scholarship. And I mentioned earlier that this idea of giving scholarships was very important. The late Paul Falleras did most amazing work in Australia, and as an Australian and as a former friend of his, I am terribly aware of the work he did with Indigenous people in Australia, also with people in Nepal, always combining the issues of health and housing and design. So I'm going to ask Victoria now to speak to how can we build back better in Lismore, and she will tell you also about the terrible floods that happened in the beginning of 2022. So if we can keep it going quite fast, Victoria and Jed, that would be great. It's all yours, and I will do the slides. So Victoria, are you online?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, indeed, we can. Welcome, welcome.
Hi. Hi, everyone. I'm speaking to you today from Gadigal country in Sydney, and I wanted to thank Anna for inviting me to participate today. It's a really great opportunity. Next slide, please. So last year, I was a recipient of the Paul Falleras Foundation Architecture Scholarship, along with Genevieve Quinn. And the purpose of this scholarship is to provide graduates with funding to explore a project that focuses on improving health and living conditions in Australia. Next slide. At the time of applying for the scholarship in March of last year, unprecedented flood events were unfolding across the eastern coast of Australia. And these events impacted millions of people, displacing thousands from their homes and costing over $5 billion in damage. Next. Unsurprisingly, both Genevieve and I pursued projects in communities that were environmentally and socioeconomically impacted by this event. Genevieve looked to the Metropolitan Centre of Brisbane, whilst I looked to Lismore, which is a regional city that became known as the epicentre of the disaster. Next. And whilst we were not consciously working with the Sustainable Development Goals in mind, it is really interesting to reflect on how this scholarship provided a unique platform for us to propel them within our work. And these goals are deeply interconnected, and particularly when it comes to thinking about how we can improve resilience in our built environment against the threat of natural hazards. Next. Lismore is located on the far north coast of New South Wales in Australia. It is a region known as the Northern Rivers. These are the traditional lands of the Bundjalung people, and the landscape is defined by its rivers, floodplains, and subtropical rainforest. Next. Today, Lismore is home to around 45,000 people. The historic city centre sits at the junction of two rivers, and as you can see here, residential areas have sprawled out in all directions along a low-lying floodplain. Next.
The story of Lismore's settlement is not unique, and it began during the widespread logging of the region. And this is a condition that is shared by hundreds of towns across Australia. Next. And so as a result, periodic flooding has always been a part of the history of this city. However, it is the increasing intensity and frequency of natural hazards that are testing the built environment to its limits. Next. On the 28th of February last year, Lismore experienced its highest flood in recorded history. Next. Overnight, floodwaters overtopped the levee and reached a peak of 14.5 metres, submerging the city centre and some low-lying suburbs in about 4.5 metres of water. Next. It was the unprecedented height of this flood that caught many residents by surprise. It reached 3 metres higher than the last flood 6 years ago, and it was also about 2 metres higher than the current flood planning levels. Next. These are some images of the aftermath of the flood, which produced about 70,000 tonnes of flood damaged waste, which was sent to landfill. Next. And as a result of this cleanup, many homes and shops were left stripped bare and remain as empty shells. And around a third of shops in the city centre remain like this. Next. And so the question became, how can we build back better following an unprecedented flood event? And there are a lot of questions around how we can improve resilience in environments where communities are impacted by increasingly risky flood events. And so responding to this question, I explored just a handful of the hundreds of potential solutions that are currently being put forward to help build greater flood resilience. And these exist at all scales. Next. I was particularly interested in the city centre and what would become of the existing built fabric that is so well loved by the community if surrounding houses were slowly relocated from the centre. Next. One solution is to think about retrofitting our buildings for greater resilience. And this solution accepts that floodwaters may periodically inundate the ground floor. However, it builds in elements that can help support businesses to better plan for and clean up following a flood event. Whilst this solution takes on a high level of risk, you can imagine that just a couple of these buildings, perhaps one or two on each main street, could provide a refuge and a sense of security for businesses who wish to remain in the city centre. Next. Flood resilient principles have existed for hundreds of years in vernacular buildings found around the world. And some of the case studies I looked to were the tiled shop houses of Singapore and the canal houses of Amsterdam, which have very innovative approaches to storage on rooftops. Next. And so in a series of drawings, I tried to kind of illustrate how these principles could be applied in a familiar shop top building in Lismore city centre. And I developed these as a visual aid that might help community discussion around new building typologies in the city centre. And so here you can see how living spaces have been elevated above the maximum flood level. And this provides opportunities to potentially stack affordable accommodation and rooftop storage for communal use into buildings. Next. Developing new resilience within flood-prone cities comes with many challenges. And this is the legacy of colonial settlement across Australia. However, in line with the UN's goals for more sustainable cities, there also lies an opportunity to retain and strengthen our existing built environments. Resilient cities don't have to look radically different from the ones we live in today. And there are a series of simple solutions that we can embed into our existing built environments to support local economies and to support communities who hold a deep connection to place. Next. Oh, and that's the end. Sorry, I think there was a slide missing, but that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very, very much, Victoria. And we're now going to see more of Lismore through the presentation by Jed Long, who is the co-founder and director of Cave Urban Sydney, does wonderful work in bamboo.
and is also a PhD candidate at the University of Tasmania. Jed, I will start your slides.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I was at the conference, and it was funny because I was presenting on a completely different topic. But as I was listening to all the talks, this project that we're working on kept coming to mind. So it's really nice that I've got the chance to follow up after the conference and talk a little bit about the work we're doing in Lismore. Next slide. So I am presenting on behalf of Cave Urban. We are a collective, and like any architectural project, it's not just the architects, it's the whole collective of all the different people who are involved. So particularly, I just want to recognize John Stewart, who is the conductor of the Living School and has really brought together the community in an amazing way for this project. And also Luke Renshaw, who with Balanced Earth are the builders on this project. And Nikki Long, who's the other director at Cave Urban, who has been working on this project. Next slide. So we started working in Lismore, God, 8 years ago now, I think, talking about this project for the Living School. And one of the key things from the very beginning of the project was that we were looking at the adaptive reuse of buildings within the Lismore city centre. Next slide. And so we were trying to pull together a strategy for design where we were making use of found objects in new and creative ways, because ultimately this was a school. And it was a school that really was encouraging imagination. So the building involved doing things like taking train carriages and using them as classrooms. We were also really interested in, I guess, diversifying what a classroom is. So part of the project involved purchasing a houseboat so that students could actually do their science classes as they rode up and down the rivers around Lismore. And this actually really set up this school for being able to respond to the floods, because they were already talking about a kind of diverse and resilient education strategy that involved education taking place beyond the four walls of a building. Next slide. And so for this first project, we were really interested in adaptive reuse. And so what that meant was, how do we take an existing building, which used to be a doctor's practice, and retrofit it, and particularly retrofit it for passive design. So in Lismore, in Australia, you know, your solar orientation means that sun comes from the north, and the main facade was all north facing. So what we did was we set all the windows in 60 centimeters. We built in planters so that we could create a green facade and create shading for all the windows. We turned the windows into louvers so that we could ventilate the building. And we did things like this so that we could make use of the embodied energy of what was already there. We also wanted to work with local materials. In the region, there is a lot of bamboo, and our practice, Cave Urban, does a lot of work with bamboo. So we ran community building projects where we took members of the school community into bamboo forests, harvested the bamboo, and wove things like the ceiling of one of the classrooms. We also used found objects. So we made use of trees that were sourced from local farms that had fallen over. We sourced pretty much all of the equipment for the kitchens off Facebook Marketplace. And because of this, we really had to relinquish a lot of the control that we have as architects to others. It meant that, you know, our design would change depending upon what we found. Next slide. And we were really happy with this outcome until the floods came. And the floods were a huge shock, because the whole way through the design process, we had spoken about, I guess, the potential flood levels. We designed the building so that it could withstand a flood as per the planning regulations. And then, as Victoria mentioned, this flood came along that was 4.5 meters and significantly higher than anything they'd seen before. And you can see here, you know, as a sense of scale, the fact that the floods came up to the second story. And so all the ideas that we had around being able to take equipment and materials up to the second story to store during a flood completely went out the window, as that second story was inundated and everything was flooded. Next slide. And so there was many consequences that came from this. People lost their houses, the whole city centre was destroyed, but also there are other consequences. And in particular with this project, there was the fact that we no longer had a school. So how do people access a basic resource and right like education in a time of a crisis? Next slide. So I thought we'd just play this video quickly to give you a sense of what was going on.
Can I just press this, Shannon?
Yeah, if you just click the image.
Good. Thank you, Jen.
Look, we were really hitting our strides. School was fantastic. We had everything coming together. We had this build-up of community. It was incredible after 2 years what we'd achieved. And all of a sudden, our dreams, our hopes just went. At first, I was totally overwhelmed, as anyone would in this circumstance. And I went, you've got the option of choice as to how you react. And my response has been, let's go positive, let's rebuild, let's refocus, let's find the positives that can come from this travesty. Look, the Living School is about, can a school power a community, engage a community? And this is so important for us as a town. We want to be the school that brings the community back together.
Thanks, Anna. I think one of the things that was really shocking about these floods was that, you know, Australia is a first world country. It is a highly resilient place compared to many other places in the world. But events like floods, like fires, really, I think, hammer home how the impacts of climate change affect all of us. And that, you know, no matter what the resilience is, people will always be impacted. And so in the kind of aftermath of the floods, when the school was relocating, design started to take on a really interesting aspect because we were trying to scramble and come up with ways with John how they could continue to house students and educate them. And at the same time, we knew that there was only so much money that we had available. So we couldn't just go about creating things immediately without also trying to consider what the long-term needs were. So they were able to relocate to an existing nearby TAFE. But at the same time, we also had this piece of land on John's farm. And we were starting to envisage how we could create a school environment that would house the kids in the short term, but also have a long-term legacy as, I guess, a place of education on land, allowing students to engage with things like making their own classrooms, growing food, and really getting outside of a traditional classroom environment. So the on-land learning formed a really big part of the recovery process, and it allowed students to keep having an education, but also engage and involve themselves as part of the reconstruction. Next slide. It also really affected what was the next stage of the entire school project, which was the creation of a high school in the center of Lismore. And this was a site that had been purchased and acquired before the floods, but then the floods happened during the design process. And so it really caused us to evaluate how we went about designing this project. It was on one of the main streets of town, right next to the river, and it was completely inundated by the flood. Next slide. So as we looked at the building after the flood and looked at the existing design, one of the really big things we were considering was how do we adapt again an existing piece of infrastructure, but also how do we take away from that building and add new things? For instance, bring in green space into an urban city centre that doesn't have a lot of that. So Paul Folleros, who was the reason behind Victoria's scholarship and was one of my great architectural mentors, he always had this idea of alterations and subtractions. How do we make use of existing built form, but also at the same time take away and reconsider how much space we actually need? So for this project, we really started to subtract from the building areas that were impacted by flooding. Next slide. Creating green space in the middle of the building in areas that were damaged by the floods, looking at creating an urban forest and clearing out the entire ground floor of the building so that in the case that there was a future flood, that whole ground floor could be completely submerged and washed out at the end of it without any damage. We also looked at parts of the building that escaped flood damage. So there were 2 first floor height levels. And so we really concentrated on the areas where the flood didn't reach, knowing that hopefully next time there is a flood, these areas will hopefully stay untouched. And we also raised up the building, creating higher areas that we could and that we knew we could take all of the, resources to in the case of a flood. Next slide. Because we were deconstructing this building, one of the really key aspects of this project is urban mining. How do we take the existing resources that are already there on site and reuse them in new ways? Next slide. But this was actually a challenge. It wasn't as simple as us being able to deconstruct and reconstruct, particularly after the flood. There were all sorts of regulatory issues that we were confronted with, particularly that the insurers wanted to demolish the building. It was definitely cheaper for them to do that. It was also deemed that any material that was exposed to the floodwaters was now hazardous. And so we had to really work with the builders and the community to create a methodology for how we could strip out the materials that were destroyed and unfortunately get rid of them, but how we could also preserve what could survive. And so materials like hardwood, steel, concrete, they were all still usable. So we had to create this process of cleaning them and ensuring that they could be verified as being sanitized so that we can make use of them again. Next slide. And so coming away from the Copenhagen conference and looking at some of the key lessons that they were talking about, really kind of allowed me to reevaluate this process in light of some of the statements that were being made at the conference. In particular, this idea that, after a flood, a lot of the messaging was about relocating. What are people doing building on a floodplain? But the unfortunate reality is that Lismore, firstly, is a low socioeconomic region comparative to other parts of Australia, and people don't often have a choice to relocate. And so John, as the conductor of the school, really wanted to ensure that the building remained in Lismore, in the heart of Lismore, and served as, a demonstration project for how we can rebuild and how we can continue to live in the face of looming disasters like floods. We also really emphasize the fact that we only want to use existing built structure in projects like this. We have so much existing urban resources. And so the whole project is designed around adaptive reuse and making use of the existing recycled materials that we have. We also wanted to, in that process, accommodate natural ecosystems, and food production has formed a big part of this. How do we grow food on site? How do we work with locally available natural resources like timber and bamboo? And how do we make use of recycled materials everywhere that we can? And one of the key lessons I actually learned was a talk that happened during one of the sessions on the value of waste by a guy called Tom Buckland. And he was talking about the deconstruction of a building in Denmark. And one of his key takeaways was that demolition is kind of often seen as an add-on to the construction process, whereas really it should be considered as a trade alongside skills like plumbing, electricians, and carpentry. because the way that we deconstruct a building really is critical for the way that we can reuse materials. So I thought that was a really valuable lesson, particularly when we're trying to do projects like this. Next slide. And ultimately, I guess to sum up, I find the idea of the promotion of the SDGs is a really great framework for how we work as architects. Often I think architecture gets caught up in the aesthetic, and I think the SDGs gives us a much broader framework that allows us to think about all the other things, all the messy things that are part of how we build and how we live. And I think in flood events or disaster events like what we saw in Lismore, it really highlights how everyone's vulnerable, and how design does really form a key part of the short, medium, and long-term consequences of how we build back. And for me, as a designer, I think the idea of agency is a really critical component. So an architect obviously has a guiding hand in the design process, but there's no way a project gets built without many, many other people's involvement. And I think relinquishing some of the control, allowing flexibility, not being so caught up in the finished design detailing that you can't incorporate already found objects, I think is really important if we want to, I guess, add some humility to the way that we design, and think about the local context, and the financial capacity and the regulations and all the different constraints that influence how we can do a project. And finally, you know, looking at this example in Lismore, it was really the community that made all the difference. It was the community that came together and cleaned up, that allowed the school to reopen, that washed all of the building materials that came out and formed the enthusiasm and the support for the project to continue and be rebuilt. So at the end of the day, I think, yeah, it's community-based solutions that really can make significant change in this whole process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jed. And I think what's really important is that you brought the 10 lessons from the conference back to a real project in rural New South Wales. And I think that's just excellent. And I think you've also brought the principles of community participation and so on so much into the foreground. So I thank you and Victoria, and indeed all our other speakers, for their terrific presentations. I know it's become rather a long session. We always get time creep in these, as we all know, and we started a bit late because things didn't quite work. But so at this point, it's 8 o'clock. Now, whether everybody wants to sign off, or whether anybody wants to do what we really wanted to do here tonight, which was to share some ideas about the what next and where. And I don't know whether everybody online could be putting in the chat box, which we will certainly record, if you have a sort of an idea for an action idea for education, research, or practice. And we're looking for ideas, and here we've said, think big, think bold, think out of the box. Now, what I could suggest is to all of you online, if you could just write something in and give some sort of feedback on that. Where do we take this discussion next? We don't really know, but we've put out all this material tonight to try and sort of stimulate that conversation. So on Zoom, can you think big, think bold, and think out of the box? And I thought what we could do is just for about 5 minutes, I could invite Adam and Sylvia up here just to try and manage the process within this room. And I'm hoping some of you have comments. Also, if you feel you're not going to get a say right now, you are registered online, so you can also write into the chat. Adam Lubinsky, you've met already. Both come up. Sylvia Vircher, who came with us to Copenhagen, and who is with Perkins Eastman International here in New York, and she will also help monitor this. if we get to it, after that, Peniel and I will try and wrap up what we heard, but it looks like we're going to probably lose our audience. So just a few minutes, we could see if you have, we won't do those, the individual ones.
No? Oh, okay. So maybe just 10 seconds, 20 seconds, everybody to think and to assimilate everything that we have been listening and great ideas. Maybe to break the ice and to give you a little bit of time, I'm gonna start for my big, bold idea that will say, as a architect and urban designer in the private sector, I think that talking with clients about SDGs is key, because this is what I do, and it helps me to bring better projects, and it helps me as well to educate or collaborate with the clients and to bring us into a common ground about the SDGs. So this is my bold and big statement, like talk to your clients in the private sector about the SDGs and try to bring the SDGs in your diagrams, in your maps, in your drawings, and talk about them. And they will ask you, what is this? And then a conversation will start. So this is my big bold statement.
I'm not going to share one because you heard from me already. So I'd really be interested to hear from someone out there. Yeah, go ahead.
Do we have a mic, or do you want to? You have them.
And Shannon,
I was very impressed by the RISE presentation and bringing plantings to places where they are desperately needed. During the Bloomberg administration, the city planted 1 million trees. I was involved with that, but I didn't know then until tonight how many trees are actually in New York. Does anyone here know that number? 5.2 million. So adding 1 million trees a few years ago was a significant increase. Big bold would be to double it, not to 2 million, double the 5 million. 5 million trees.
I like that.
Just relative to the whole event of this evening. One, I want to thank you for organizing it. Not having been able to go to Copenhagen, I got a phenomenally good insight into what happened, condensed beautifully by the presentations. But what I would like to share in my observation is, one, the work of the UIA over the last number of years since they began to unpack the SDGs has been rather extraordinary. For those of you who don't know it, and I would suggest you can go online and find out more in terms of the publications. For the presentations we did, I was very gratified to see those that actually included the SDGs, that either impacted or devolved from what they did. One way or another made that connection. I think 1 or 2 projects didn't, and I would actually encourage in their future presentations to go back to the SDGs and apply them where appropriate, so it continues to promote what, in fact, I mean, this is thinking big with the SDGs is, there's only a few things in the world. A lot of people have produced a lot of metrics. The Rockefeller Foundation did. Some of them are palpable, they're comprehensible. You can understand them quickly and easily, and you can apply them. So I'm very promotional about making sure we do that whenever and wherever possible. So this evening was a very, very good example of where that was done and how much more it can be done. So that's, again, another thank you to GSAB, CSU, UIA, and the UN. That's my.
Who else?
not only does he want to promote the SDGs, he's actually wearing the pin. So Lance, like, that's it.
You know, the people that you have up front are really fantastic. I celebrate Anna Rubo continuously because the local project challenge is the first time I saw people from all over the world participate and get recognized for that really understanding of the SDGs in their local community. So if you don't know the local project challenge, I advertise it one more time for Anna. Look it up and you'll just get a better feeling for what people can do I learned about Copenhagen. I was sorry I wasn't there. And I think that it's essential for, we heard about inclusion, and inclusion is terribly important, especially, for older people and disabled people. But inclusion also means younger people as well. And that often is not recognized in the way open space is done.
One big goal idea. You have many ideas, like give us the big idea, how you think about reapplying the SDGs.
Oh my, since I'm going to see you tomorrow at 12:30, I'm going to leave any more words, except that I'm delighted that I was here tonight.
We've got one comment over here.
One? Oh, good.
Everyone, this was very inspirational. Thank you so much for putting this event together. I was really inspired, especially by, sorry, I want to make sure I get the name, by Jet, and about specifically of what we learned slide. I thought that was great about after the flood and after the rebuilding, what have they actually learned, such as what the insurers actually want and how other players are a huge part of the rebuilding design and all of the great ideas we might have. So I think one question I have is how can innovative projects such as these, specifically presented by the global students, how can they be leveraged to inspire concrete actions and solutions and for climate justice in their respective regions? What support is necessary in their collaboration to make this happen? What we learned from all of these projects, I think would be a nice step to see next.
Very nice, thank you.
So I'm Ruchi. I am visiting from New Delhi, India, and I'm one of the local project challenge winners. And I was in Copenhagen too for presenting another of our work. So we co-design with young children and make their blueprints a reality with the government. So my big bold idea is everybody a co-designer for SDGs and making democratizing design through young children.
Got a comment over here, and maybe we take two more. See how we go.
So the biggest thing that I took away was urgency and the need for change now. The flood specifically was astonishing, the fact that a 2-story building got flooded. So I think I was also at Copenhagen. I think that's what I took away from everything in general, just urgency and working together now to make change, because we might not have time later to make the change.
Last one.
So I'm not an architect, I'm a journalist, but I was just inspired by, the theme of inclusivity in architecture, which made me think about stories that journalists can write that combine inclusive architecture, which is especially important in the case of the housing crisis right now in New York City, when we need to create more housing for everybody, but especially affordable housing. I don't know if you guys are familiar with public housing in New York, but there's about to be a change potentially where there's a public housing project that will be demolished, proposed to be demolished in the Chelsea neighborhood, which could set a precedent for the future of public housing in this city.
Last one. Last big goal. Last big goal.
The big goal is that you already whittled down the SDG to 6 areas. That's 17.
Nick, you ready? Okay, well, thank you, Sylvia and Adam, for doing that. And And before I hand over to Nick, I would just like to thank all of our presenters online and in person. Thank you so much for taking part in this and for inspiring what has been a very brief but very spectacular, as they say on PBS News, big, bold bit of thinking. So thank you, and I'll hand over to Nick to close us out. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Anna. I really just want to thank everyone here in this room and everyone online. We had a great showing, a really great diversity. I want to highlight both who's in the room and the co-sponsors. I think something really important and rare in this city happens. We're a big city and we don't often get together the different universities, the different student bodies in a way that we've done through the CSU's aspects of this project, but also here tonight for this program. I think that's very inspiring. I'd like to build on it. If I had a big idea, it would probably be to build on that. I think we can learn quite a bit together and do something quite wonderful together. I would really like to thank the Consortium for Sustainable Urbanization, of which I'm the Secretary and President-elect, and GSAP, Anna. Thank you so much for your work and leadership. Adam, thank you wherever you went. Adam, thank you so much for your work and leadership and working some miracles to make this happen. As everyone knows, there are bumps along every road in an event, so thank you very much. UIA, Columbia, Center for Sustainable Urban Development, Columbia C's Center for Buildings, Infrastructure, and Public Space, Columbia SEPA's Urban and Social Policy Program, Columbia SEPA's Economic and Political Development Program, Hunter College, UPP, Pratt Institute School of Architecture, and City College of New York, Bernard and Ann Spitzer School of Architecture. I want to thank everybody for not getting weighed down in the sobering, terrible aspects of this, but to keep the head up, to keep optimism, and to be solutions oriented and really thinking really positively about what we can bring from especially from the design professions, into envisioning a better future. I hope you all can hold on to that, and want to thank everybody very much again for joining us here tonight. Thank you.